Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes & Co.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello and welcome to The Briefing, your afternoon fix of all the latest political news, debate and analysis. I'm Arlene Foster, and this afternoon I'm joined in the studio by former Special Advisor to the Home Office and current Conservative Councillor Claire Pearsall. So here's what's coming up over the next hour. US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has threatened the UK, saying that we will not get a trade deal with the US if action is taken on the protocol. We'll be joined by Conservative MP Sir John Wedgwood to discuss that. And with the rise of inflation to 9%, the cost of living crisis is starting to bite across the country for many people. I'll speak to Matthew Leash from the Institute of Economic Affairs about the ongoing crisis and how you at home can save on bills. And with 11 more cases of monkeypox confirmed, is it time to start worrying? We will be discussing this with a top virologist. And as ever, we want to hear from you. Give us your political briefing. Send in your views and opinions by emailing gbviews@gbnews.uk or tweet me at GB News. But first, here's the news with Rihanna.
Thank you, Arlene. It's 1 minute past 3. Your top stories from the GB Newsroom. The Prime Minister insists he won't block names in Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties. Boris Johnson says he's looking forward to seeing the contents in which senior figures involved are expected to be named. He's vowed to shake up number 10 over the COVID breaching gatherings. It's understood those impacted will be contacted and given a chance to respond before publication. Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg doesn't think these are resigning matters and that people make mistakes.
The rules were as they were, but looking back at it, and I think this is a very important part for the inquiry to play, we need to think whether those laws that stop people comforting the dying were ever right. And I hope the inquiry will look at that in case we ever have another pandemic. How proportionate were the rules and how far should the state go in controlling what people do?
The Prime Minister says he understands the importance of tackling obesity in the UK, particularly because it puts pressure on the NHS. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver has been leading a protest at Downing Street over the delay in new junk food laws. An overhaul to buy one, get one free promotions in supermarkets was due to go ahead this year, but it's been pushed back to October 2023. Tesco and Sainsbury's say they're committed to the original government deadlines. Boris Johnson says consumers need offers in these tough times.
There are some things at the moment where we think they make very little difference to obesity, and they can affect people's weekly outgoings, people's budgets. And at this particular time, if people can save on their food bills with some offers, then I think we've just got to be flexible whilst continuing to tackle obesity.
Boris Johnson there, but Jamie Oliver says it's time for change.
It's not like a cute campaign. It ain't jazz hands. This is fundamental. It's as profound as the smoking ban. It saves lives. It's about making young people do better, live longer, and be more productive.
11 new cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total here to 20. The Health Secretary has said he's updated G7 health ministers on what's known about the spread of the virus. Sajid Javid says most cases are mild and that the UK has secured vaccines effective against the disease. Monkeypox is usually found in West Africa, which is why outbreaks across the rest of the world have caused alarm. Ukraine's Azov regiment says they've been issued a military command to stop defending the city of Mariupol. The volunteer brigade, affiliated with the far right, says civilians and heavily wounded defenders have been evacuated from the city's Azovstal steel plant and that dead bodies are still being removed. Moscow reports almost 2,000 Ukrainian fighters have now surrendered. Some of them have arrived in a Russian-controlled town near Donetsk. The Chancellor and his wife have made the Sunday Times rich list for the first time as Russian billionaires tumble down the rankings. Rishi Sunak and Akshata Murthy have been ranked at 222 on the list with their joint £730 million fortune. The couple's finances have come under scrutiny in recent months. It was estimated Ms Murthy's non-dom status could have saved her £20 million in taxes. 8 new cities have been created as part of the celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee taking place in 2 weeks' time. The Cabinet Office announced the capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley, is one of them, alongside Douglas on the Isle of Man, Bangor in Northern Ireland, Dunfermline in Scotland, Wrexham in Wales, Colchester, Doncaster and Milton Keynes in England. Brexit Minister Jacob Rees-Mogg says the new city status has been awarded on merit, not on size. And events are taking place up and down the country for World Bee Day today. According to Friends of the Earth, though, 35 species of UK bees are under threat of extinction. GBNews reporter Jeff Moody met up with apiarist Paul Andrews. He told us some plants, fruits and vegetables will disappear from our shelves if more isn't done to protect bees.
1 in 3 mouthful of foods that we eat depends on pollination, and bees are the principal pollinator.
So, quite literally, we would have no food?
You would have a very much reduced variety of food. You still have the wind to pollinate grain crops, but other than that, apples, tomatoes, fruits, all that type of thing would be gone.
A stark warning there. This is GB News. We'll bring you more as it happens now, though. It's back to Arlene with the briefing.
Welcome back to the briefing. It's nearly 7 minutes past 3 in the afternoon. So tensions between the European Union and the government have heated up as the EU's ambassador to the UK has rejected the Foreign Secretary's plans to rewrite the Northern Ireland Protocol, warning of a potential retaliation if the government presses ahead with its plans. And earlier today, US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi threatened the UK and said that the prospect of a free trade deal between the two countries would be unlikely if the UK acts on the protocol. So what can we expect to see in the coming days and weeks? And will the government really press ahead this time with its plans to scrap the terms of the protocol? Well, to discuss this and all of the protocol developments, I'm delighted to be joined by Conservative MP for Wokingham, Sir John Redwood. And John, you and I have talked about the protocol for a long time now, but do we think that there is actually going to be action by the government now to deal with those huge issues between Great Britain and Northern Ireland?
Well, there better be. It's very disappointing to see Nancy Pelosi misunderstanding both the Good Friday Agreement and the protocol. She needs to read both. She needs to understand that it is the EU which is violating the protocol. It is the EU which has done great damage to the Good Friday Agreement. The unionist side of the community in Northern Ireland cannot cooperate in the Assembly as the Good Friday Agreement wishes, because the protocol is so damaging to Northern Ireland. And until the American Democrats understand this, it's very difficult to take advice from them. And I hope when they come on a visit here, they will come to learn rather than to lecture, because they so misunderstand the current position. It is the UK that can rescue the whole situation for the unionists in Northern Ireland, but we must legislate in a moderate and sensible way to restore our internal market and therefore to restore trust of the unionist community in Northern Ireland that they are still fully part of the United Kingdom as the protocol promised them. Do I think the UK government will go through with it? I think they will. I think they have to. And I think the more that the Democrats and the EU pontificate and lecture without understanding or without talking to the unionists, the more likely we are to win over moderate opinion.
I suppose, John, the frustration for those of us who live in Northern Ireland, and you've alluded to it in your first response there, is the actual fact that people don't appear to understand the very agreement that they claim to be protecting. Because, of course, the Belfast Agreement is about balancing both communities in Northern Ireland, and this protocol has taken that balance completely away. And for unionism, they see a threat to the union, but also that huge disruption to trade from Great Britain to Northern Ireland, which was supposed to be protected by the Act of Union. And they don't even understand the Belfast Agreement, is clear to me, but the protocol as well, because, of course, in the protocol, there is a section which allows changes to the protocol, Article 13.8, isn't that right?
Well, indeed. I mean, you see, what they should understand is that the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland was always far bigger than the trade between Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland. The East-West trade is very critical to both communities on both sides of the Irish Sea. And that at the moment, the trade from Northern Ireland into GB works fine because we've imposed no borders and no controls. It's all the same country and it still moves very well. It is the EU that have decided to intrude itself into trade within the United Kingdom market against the protocol and against their strong statement that they would respect the integrity of the United Kingdom. And I don't think they should have any right at all to block a supermarket in Great Britain sending some of its goods to one of its shops in Northern Ireland, particularly where it has no shops in the Republic of Ireland, and say that it needs pages and pages of paperwork and vet certificates to sell some butter or some sausages. It's just quite wrong. The EU doesn't presume to stop the supermarket sending something from London to Liverpool. So why does it stop things being sent from Liverpool to Belfast?
And again, John, this all could have been avoided if at the end of those negotiations we had been able to persuade the European Union that this could have been dealt with through alternative arrangements, through digital technology, through the assessment of risk. And it appears that that is where the Foreign Secretary is heading towards now in terms of this green lane for goods that are going into Northern Ireland as opposed to a red lane for goods that are going into the Republic of Ireland. That could have all been dealt with at the time, but the EU refused to entertain that and called it unicorn thinking.
Yes, I mean, the United Kingdom's fallen over backwards to be friendly and helpful and positive. There are many technical solutions to what the EU says its problem is. The EU claims its problem is it doesn't want non-compliant goods going across the border from Northern Ireland to the Republic of Ireland. Well, we're very happy to legislate further and to police all that. We're not trying to let our people smuggle goods across that border in the way that there was smuggling, of course, when both sides were in the European Union together. The UK will enforce it. But in return, we will make sure that we have those minimum checks that we need for our own internal market for the bulk of the goods, which are going to stay within the United Kingdom. And it is none of the EU's business. And they've now turned a trade dispute into a much wider political problem in Northern Ireland. Yeah. And it is only because of their actions that the Assembly is not now meeting and forming an executive. So they should be ashamed of themselves.
Indeed, and John, finally, you've mentioned the Executive and the Assembly in Northern Ireland not working at the moment because unionism is saying that one of the fundamentals is damaged, and that is the Belfast Agreement has been damaged by the protocol. And it was very instructive, wasn't it, to read what David Trimble had to say in relation to all of this week when he said that everything that he had done was now in peril because of the protocol. One would have thought, given his kudos, given the fact that he has a Nobel Peace Prize for the Belfast Agreement, that people would listen to him. But apparently Nancy Pelosi, Joe Biden, the European Union are all turning a deaf ear to people like David Trimble. Surely that's quite disgraceful.
Yeah, well, this is what is so disappointing. I mean, Nancy Pelosi and the senior Democrats, both intelligent people, but they're not able to comment sensibly on this situation because they only listen to one side. They talk to the Republic and they won't talk to the unionists. And I think some of the media coverage is a disgrace because they just repeat this as if this were all true. Now, Nancy Pelosi, of course, as head of the Democrats on the Hill, cannot even get a Democrat budget through the House of Representatives and the Senate, can't get the president's budget through. And then she says she's threatening us with no free trade agreement. Well, Nancy Pelosi, you can't even get your pet legislation through. So why does your view matter that much? Maybe that there will be a different result in the midterm elections.
Well, we'll all wait to see what those midterms bring. Sir John, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon and for giving us your thoughts on the protocol as ever. And now I'm going to turn to Claire, because that was quite a feisty interview, Claire. I expected that from Sir John. He's been a very close watcher of what goes on with the protocol. But it does seem that things have changed now as of that statement from the Foreign Secretary this week.
Yes, it does. It was quite disappointing to hear at an event yesterday, as you were saying, the EU ambassador to the UK stating that there would be no change to the mandate.
Yeah.
None of the EU states are willing to look at it, so we're at an impasse. And you add in Nancy Pelosi's comments, and all it does is inflame the tensions that are already there. America needs to keep its own house in order. They don't understand Northern Ireland politics.
No.
It is a very complicated issue, and the majority of people in England don't necessarily understand it, but we try to have sympathy, we try to understand. But the Americans seem to just be coming in with, size 10 feet and putting their foot right in it. It's very, very disappointing.
It is, and as I was saying to Sir John there, the fact that David Trimble, Lord Trimble, one of the architects of the Belfast Agreement, feels so passionately about this issue, writes about it in the Daily Telegraph, surely they should be listening to someone like that if they don't want to listen to the current administration at Stormont.
They absolutely should. I mean, Trimble's achievements are enormous. The Belfast Agreement was a great piece of legislation, and it has been highlighted in television programmes only this week, so maybe we ought to send that across to them. The famous Derry Girls, which has taught so many people much more about history. Perhaps we ought to do that. But we really do need to keep that Belfast Agreement in place. We need the stability in Northern Ireland. We need the Assembly up and running, which I assume that you would want to have that up and running straight away. But they need to talk to the unionists. They cannot just take one side of the story.
And that's always been the issue in Northern Ireland. There has to be consent from both sides, as it were, and that's not there at the moment, and that's where the problem is. Another story I noticed this week, Claire, was the House of Lords, and this idea that we would move the House of Lords to Stoke, above all places. What's your take on all of that?
I've heard a couple of locations. I've heard Stoke and I've also heard York being put out there, which I can understand why you would want to look at it. It may well reduce the size of the House of Lords if you're taking it to a place which is not particularly convenient for some of those in the upper house. But would it have an impact on legislative process? I'm not so sure. Aren't we all good at teleconferencing these days? Can decisions not be made and taken from other places in the United Kingdom? I love the fact that we have two houses in the House of Parliament. I love the building and the history. But maybe we do need to look at some extra ways of dealing with it.
Well, I thought it was very interesting to look at Charles Moore and what he had to say about it in The Spectator. He felt very strongly that the two houses did need to be contiguous and they needed to be together for it to work properly. But you're suggesting maybe with digital technology that we could see two different locations?
And I do. And I don't think that we have to have everybody sitting there until 3 in the morning. As we've all seen footage of the House of Lords, why would we do that when in this day and age we can actually move that legislature out and still have it functioning?
Well, who knows, Claire? It might be going to Belfast. Who knows? But we're going to move on now because cases of monkeypox are being investigated in Europe, the US, Canada, Australia and here in the United Kingdom, according to health authorities and local media reports. Today, Health Secretary Sajid Javid announced 11 more cases have been found in the UK. And this comes as the UK government says it has brought stocks of smallpox vaccine to guard against monkeypox. There isn't a scientific vaccine for monkeypox on its own, but a smallpox jab does offer some good protection since the two viruses are quite similar. Well, joining me now to discuss this is renowned virologist and the host of the Naked Scientist podcast, Dr. Chris Smith. Chris, this is all very worrying coming off the back of COVID. Could you tell our listeners and viewers something about the disease and what are the symptoms?
Well, the word monkeypox is something of a misnomer because although monkeys catch this is actually an infection of small rodents. It's carried naturally by rodents in parts of Africa. And chiefly that means West Africa and also Central Africa. And they actually break down by those two geographies into two different forms of the disease, a slightly more severe form, which is the Central African one, and a more mild form, which is the West African one. Both have a low level of impact on people normally, up to 10% severe disease rates, but in the West African form, it's just a few percent usually. Most people are not going to have anything other than a rash, a temperature, feel a bit fluey and unwell for a while, and then they recover spontaneously with no further intervention. But there are the risks of severe disease for a small minority of people, and that's why governments in a number of countries are concerned. Most countries don't have this infection, but they do see it from time to time when it's imported in travellers. People who've been to the affected geographies, come into contact with the virus and picked it up. Normally, we don't see onward transmission of the infection. It stops dead when the person catches it. They're usually isolated and there are no more cases. And why people are concerned this time is because we have one case of a traveller with the right connections in the right place at the right time to have brought it into the country. But now we've got this total of 20 cases where most of them have no travel history whatsoever. So that suggests it is spreading in the community in the UK.
Well, Chris, should we be worried given that that is the case? Because obviously in the back of everybody's minds is COVID and what happened with all of that. Should we be concerned and worried about monkeypox coming into the UK in this fashion?
Well, in some respects, the fact that we know about it, that it's been found and that we're following it, pursuing it, that there's a public health set of manoeuvres in place to flush out more cases and then to isolate the people who might be incubating the infection and stop it spreading further, it's kind of reassuring that all of that swung into action. We've got to remember the number of cases is also extremely low. It's a total of 20 cases over a period of time. It's one of those diseases which we know that we can surmount because we've controlled it. We do see it from time to time in the past. What is a concern is that it could be spreading in a sort of shadow infection in the shadows. It could be hiding where we can't see it because it's not presenting, because it's not one of those things that people spot straight away and say, ah, that's a case of monkeypox. There's no obvious sort of motivation to go and test, etc. So until we get the full measure of how many cases there are, what the real kind of clinical iceberg is here, there's the tip of the iceberg, the cases we've got visible above the water. What's the size of the iceberg under the water? That's what scientists and public health doctors are trying to find out at the moment. If that turns out to be huge, then obviously that's more problematical. But our current thinking is it's probably not huge. It's probably a smallish number of cases. We'll find out what the transmission chain is and what the connections are between the people who've got it, and then put in place appropriate steps to stop it.
So, Chris, just finally on that transmission issue, how do people catch the disease? I don't want to use the term catch the disease, but how is it transmitted to other people? Is it through contact or how is it moved about?
Well, when people go abroad and catch it, it must be some kind of contact between that person and the natural host, the small rodent or whatever, and that's usually excreta. But when a person's got it, the rate of transmission between a person and another person is actually very low. And that's probably because people are not sufficiently exposed to each other to give a virus which is not naturally an infection of humans a chance to jump between the two. But what we are seeing in the present outbreak is clustering of the infection into places where people do have prolonged or closer contact with an extended network of people. So we've seen one family sort of outbreak. We've also now got an extreme number or an excessive number of cases among the community of men who have sex with men. And that is probably a reflection on the fact that these people are well networked, they're probably meeting up, they're probably spending a lot of time together or having very close personal contact. So probably this facilitates all the possible routes of transmission, which include respiratory transmission, because when you're first infected, you can breathe out droplets of the virus, but also you can get some skin lesions from the rash that it produces. They're fully infectious too. So either close personal contact with someone who's breathing out the virus or has the lesions on their body would lead to it potentially transmitting from one person to another.
Chris, thank you so much, and thanks for your clarity, as always, in bringing us up to date on monkeypox. And of course, the UK Health Security Agency has been very clear that at the moment the risk remains low, so I don't want to alarm any of our viewers or listeners. Claire, it is worrying, though, at the same time to have something like this come in. Are you worried?
To be honest, no.
Good.
And I think that we need to take a little bit of a step back. And pre-pandemic, would we have been so concerned about things coming over. I don't know if we are just more hyper-aware now of diseases and viruses coming through. But as Chris just said, this is going to be quite a light touch. It's not many cases, and people aren't suffering hugely. It's a little bit like chickenpox in children. You feel a bit awful for a few days, and then you're better.
And so it looks pretty awful, doesn't it? I mean,
it does look pretty awful. But so does chickenpox.
Yeah, but, well, that is true. And I think it is comforting and gives me security, the fact that we are on it quite quickly and we're dealing with it quite quickly as well. Yeah. So coming up next on the briefing, we'll talk about the ongoing cost of living crisis with Matthew Leash from the Institute of Economic Affairs. Before that, let's go to a break.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
The national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
Join me, Gloria De Piero, Monday to Thursday at noon for The Briefing. We go to the parts of Parliament that you won't see elsewhere. Plus, there's exclusive interviews with MPs from all parties.
But quite often, they paper over the real truth. Why does a working class lad like you join the Tories?
That's a good question.
Don't miss it, Monday to Thursdays at noon on GB News.
Welcome back to The Briefing. Now, the Chancellor Rishi Sunak is facing mounting pressure to help families ease the cost of living crisis as inflation reaches its highest level since 1982. In a speech to the Confederation of British Industry on Wednesday, Mr Sunak said he cannot pretend helping families will be easy and warned of tough months ahead. Now, despite doubling down on the government's commitment to easing the burden, the Chancellor has not yet announced any new measures for tackling the crisis. So what measures should the Chancellor consider to tackle the cost of living crisis and alleviate financial burdens on ordinary families right across the UK? Well, joining me now to discuss this is Matthew Leash. He's Head of Public Policy at the Institute of Economic Affairs. Matthew, thanks so much for joining me this afternoon. And I suppose the question we're all asking ourselves is, what can the Chancellor do? How should he intervene to deal with this cost of living crisis?
Look, I think this is rightfully a very difficult challenge for the Chancellor. Not everything is within his control. He can't necessarily turn back time and make the Bank of England more conservative in its money printing as it was not last year. He can't undo the overseas factors that are driving some of the inflation. That said, though, I think there are steps the government can take. We've got to remember that we're facing some of the highest tax burdens in 70 years in the UK. That's something that can be addressed, particularly for lower income households. You can do small things like abolishing tariffs on food and therefore reducing the cost of food for households. You could stop introducing some of the regulations like restricting buy one, get one free offers at supermarkets that have the potential to push up the cost of living. But then I think in the longer run, the real challenge is whether or not the government's willing to do the kind of ambitious policy reforms that are going to have a really big impact on people's standard of life. Things like planning reforms to enable more houses to be built so that the fundamental underlying cost of housing isn't so expensive. Addressing the UK's very high level of childcare regulation compared to other countries that is likely pushing up the cost of childcare, as well as reforms to the energy and electricity market to ensure that it functions more efficiently and more like a market and less like a state directed operation. So really, there are options available, just a matter of how ambitious the government's willing to be with their policy agenda.
And Matthew, there's been a lot of talk, you mentioned energy there in terms of the medium term and the need to get it right. And of course, the government have produced their energy strategy now, looking at hydrogen, nuclear, all of the offshore wind options. But one of the issues that keeps coming up time and time again is this windfall tax on energy companies. Do you think that's a runner with the government? Do you think it should be a runner with the government?
Look, I think there's a lot of speculation at the moment about whether the government's going to go ahead with it. I think what was quite notable, I saw in the Times earlier this week some reports, somebody who was close to Rishi apparently said, well, we know this isn't going to have much impact, but it looks good. I think that's probably the truth of it, which is you can't really raise that much money with a windfall tax. Even by Labour's own estimate, it's going to be around £1 billion. They're already getting £7 billion more revenue as a result of the fact that of higher energy prices from VAT, from the existing windfall taxes that already exist on energy production in the UK. So it's not going to have a big, massive impact on revenue, and therefore it's not going to be a big change in the situation for the government's capacity to help people. But I think the risk is with a windfall tax is what it says about business investment. The fact that the government can come along and change the situation and tax you almost retrospectively here for earnings that you've already made, and that I think can undermine what we need. I mean, if you want more energy, if you want more electricity, if you want more gas and oil, the best way to do it is not to tax it more. And the risk is with that kind of windfall tax is that it has a negative longer term impact, even if it has some short term political benefit from the government, even if they can say, well, look at us, we did something, the overall impact wouldn't be particularly good, I don't think, for people's cost of living.
So, Matthew, just finally then, would you go after VAT and green so-called taxes instead of a windfall tax?
Well, I mean, the question is always how you're going to fund it. So one of the ideas we've talked about the IEA is the fact that a lot of the historical subsidies for green energy, for renewable energies, are extremely high. Not the current system for subsidizing solar and wind, but people who built solar and wind in the 2000s are now making massive profits because of a cross-subsidy system. So you could address some of that and then use that money to reduce the green levies. I think would be quite a sensible approach forward for the government. And potentially cutting VAT, at least temporarily, could help a lot of people as well.
Yeah, but we'll probably bring the protocol centre stage again, but we'll not talk about that now, Matthew. Well, thank you very much for joining me this afternoon, Matthew, to talk through those options for the Chancellor. Claire, what do you make of all of that? What if you were Chancellor, what would you deal with?
Oh, I think I'd be taking out the green levy. I really would. And I think that will make the most difference to people. Cutting VAT probably will help somebody more like me than the most vulnerable. So I don't think that is a good idea. And, you know, it doesn't surprise you. As a Conservative, I'm against a windfall tax.
Sure.
So I hope that we don't U-turn on that. It isn't going to raise it. It is a very short-termist issue.
I think it's a red herring, actually. The amount of money that it actually brings in isn't that much. But anyway, coming up after the news, we will be discussing the flip-flopping SNP, as they've suggested they may be open to maintaining nuclear weapons to become a part of NATO. And as ever, please do continue to send in your views to gbviews@GBNews or tweet at GBNews. But first, here's Rhiannon a little later with your news headlines.
Thank you, Arlene. It's 3:34, your top stories from the GB newsroom. The Prime Minister insists he won't block names in Sue Gray's report into Downing Street lockdown parties. Boris Johnson says he's looking forward to seeing the contents, in which senior figures involved are expected to be named. Celebrity chef Jamie Oliver's led a protest at Downing Street over a delay in new junk food laws. An overhaul to buy one, get one free promotions in supermarkets was due to go ahead this year, but has been pushed back to October 2023. The Prime Minister justified the delay, saying consumers need to be supported through the cost of living crisis.
There are some things at the moment where we think they make very little difference to obesity, and they can affect people's weekly outgoings, people's budgets. And at this particular time, if people can save on their food bills with some offers, then I think we've just got to be flexible whilst continuing to tackle obesity.
Ukraine's Azov regiment says they have been issued a military command to stop defending the city of Mariupol. The volunteer brigade affiliated with the far right says civilians and heavily wounded defenders have been evacuated from the city's Azovstal steel plant and that dead bodies are still being removed. 11 new cases of monkeypox have been confirmed in the UK, taking the total here to 20. The Health Secretary says he's updated G7 health ministers on what's known about the spread of the virus. Sajid Javid says most cases are mild and that the UK has secured vaccines effective against the disease. And 8 new cities have been created as part of the celebrations for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee, with at least one named in every UK nation. The capital of the Falkland Islands, Stanley, is one of them. Douglas in the Isle of Man has also claimed the civic honour. TV online and DAB+ radio, this is GB News.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Here's a quick snapshot of today's markets. The pound is 1.247 to the dollar. The pound is 1.182 to the euro. And the price of gold currently stands at £1,468.94 per ounce.
Direct Bullion sponsors the Finance Report on GB News for gold and silver investment.
Every morning from 6 o'clock, we'll wake you up with GB News Breakfast with all the stories you didn't know from the night before.
So whether it's serious news, entertainment, or your own views from all over our great nation, we're here to kick off your day with a smile.
And the national media should be reflecting and reporting what's happening here. You will notice the northwestern accents.
Whether you're with us on TV, radio, or online, every morning, it's breakfast from 6 a.m. Hope you can join us.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Welcome back to the briefing. It's coming up to 20 to 4 on Friday afternoon. So the SNP's defence policy for an independent Scotland appeared in disarray after the party spokesman said that the country could still host the nuclear deterrent. Nicola Sturgeon said earlier this month that it was her expectation and hope that Trident would be removed from the Clyde in the first Parliament after a yes vote. However, SNP Defence spokesperson Stuart MacDonald said that he could see an independent Scotland host nuclear weapons for years to come. His comments followed a row over the First Minister saying membership of the NATO nuclear alliance would be a cornerstone of Scotland's defence in a speech in Washington, D.C. on Monday. Ms Sturgeon, of course, failed to tell her audience that it was also SNP policy to remove Trident from Fastlane, potentially disarming one of NATO's 3 nuclear powers. Well, joining me now is the Scottish Conservative MSP, Graham Simpson. Graham, this, of course, must have come as a little bit of a surprise to you that the SNP were looking to change their policy.
Yeah, I think Stuart MacDonald's comments probably came as a surprise to Nicola Sturgeon as well, because it's always been SNP policy that they're against nuclear weapons. And of course, yeah, as you know, Arlene, if you want to be a member of NATO and you already have nuclear weapons, which we do in Scotland, then you have to keep them. So, they really can't have it both ways, which is what they appear to be doing.
It's not just about that, trying to look as if they don't really want nuclear weapons, but actually we're going to keep nuclear weapons because that will allow us to get into NATO and we really want to be in that club, although we don't want to be in the UK club.
Yeah, I mean, when Nicola Sturgeon went over to the States, she should have been more honest with them. She should have said, we'd love to be in NATO, but we don't want your nuclear weapons. Of course, she couldn't bring herself to do that. The whole policy is a complete shambles. It doesn't make sense. Nicola Sturgeon knows that we need to be in NATO. But in order to be in NATO, we need to retain nuclear weapons. It's a nuclear alliance. So, the SNP is all over the place on this. You cannot leave the UK and stay in NATO and get rid of nuclear weapons. None of that adds up.
The First Minister was in America making a number of speeches. There's been some photographs coming back. We've been talking about Nancy Pelosi in terms of the Northern Ireland Protocol. She was photographed with Nancy Pelosi. Goodness knows what the conversation was around there. But just like the rest of the UK, Scotland's in the midst of a cost of living crisis, Graham. Should she have been in America at this time?
Well, I'm not entirely sure what she was doing there. We've dubbed it the Independence Tour. We've heard nothing from her as to what the benefit to Scotland of this grand visit was. I really don't know what it was all about. Don't know what she was talking to Nancy Pelosi about. We know, of course, that since she's been back on UK soil, at Bute House, her official residence, in Edinburgh, she's already met Michelle O'Neill, the Sinn Féin leader. She couldn't wait to meet somebody else who wants to break up the UK. So I think we can only speculate what those two would have been talking about.
Well, isn't that quite interesting, Graham? Because I can't recall when I was First Minister of Northern Ireland receiving an invitation to go to Bute House for bilateral meetings. Because, of course, if you're First Minister in Northern Ireland, you're tied in with the Deputy First Minister. So Michelle O'Neill must have been visiting in her capacity as Sinn Féin Vice President. How does that make you feel?
Well, that's really interesting that you never got an invite. Of course, that's pretty insulting that you didn't. You should have done. But, isn't it telling, Arlene, that Nicola Sturgeon cannot wait to have Michelle O'Neill over to Scotland, and yet she couldn't even have the courtesy to invite you? I'm sure you'd have taken up her invitation, of course.
Well, I would, of course, because Scotland and Northern Ireland have a lot in common. As you know, we're very close neighbours. I've lobbied and used my time to try and get the A75 and the A77 in Scotland dealt with in a better way, because, of course, they haven't been upgraded in the manner in which they should have been.
No.
And for us in Northern Ireland, that's very important, Graham.
Yeah, absolutely. And we in the Scottish Conservatives keep making that case. Both those roads, as you well know, are vital to our links with Northern Ireland. They're vital not just for those links, but actually for the the southwest of Scotland. They're essential, but for some reason the SNP don't want to upgrade them. It's harmful for trade, and what we see is freight companies taking their business down to England. Yeah, those two roads are absolutely vital, but they just won't upgrade them, and they're essential. You know that.
Well, I've travelled them many times, Graham, so I absolutely do know that. Thank you for joining me this afternoon, and I'm sure we'll be talking about this again in the near future. Thanks for that. So, Claire, let me bring you in there. I mean, that's very interesting that Nicola Sturgeon, she's been to America to talk to colleagues over there. She's invited Michelle O'Neill, the Vice President of Sinn Féin, over to Butte House. I've made the point that she didn't invite me when I was First Minister over to Butte House. I mean, they are ramping up this independence and separatist cause in a very meaningful way, aren't they?
Yes, they are, but she seems to be very confused as to what this independence is going to bring. So she kind of wants everything on her plate to remain in NATO, as you say, but not to have nuclear weapons and to work with
keep Sterling.
Keep Sterling. And you sort of think you cannot have all of this.
Yes.
And I don't think for 1 minute that she stopped to think about it. But going over to America to talk about independence in Scotland, where's the benefit to the taxpayers of Scotland when they are currently suffering with the problems with ScotRail and on the ferries, the cost of living crisis, many, many more important things. But I think to lose Faslane would be a serious blow to Scotland and to the United Kingdom and to our NATO allies.
Absolutely. And I mean, it appears that everything that she does now is directed in the cause of Scottish independence, despite, as you said, there's the ferries issue that hasn't been dealt with. I think it's over £200 million it's cost the taxpayer. Now, we've been talking about infrastructure in terms of roads, there's education, there's the health service, the drugs problem in Scotland, but everything goes into independence.
It does, and that seems to be the major argument, that Scotland, well, Nicola Sturgeon wants independence. Now, they've had a referendum. It was rejected. People wanted to stay in the United Kingdom. So I think she now needs to look at what her domestic agenda is. Put that to one side. You can always have your belief that you would like an independent Scotland, but if it's not going to happen, how are you going to make life better for your residents?
Indeed, and we shouldn't take away from the fact that at the local elections recently, again, the SNP not only held their ground, but increased their seats. So very much it appears that the SNP have a grip on Scotland at the moment. But if there was a referendum, and you've alluded to it, the polls do seem to be sticking with staying in the UK, don't they?
It certainly does, and it's something that I've looked at previously, because you do wonder, since Brexit, if the agenda had changed, would they vote the same way? But all the polling suggests that they actually would, and they would remain in the United Kingdom. So I think we can look at that and just think, well, you've had your moment, you've had your vote. Let's just get on and see how well we can work together and not have the United Kingdom falling apart, especially when things like the crisis in Ukraine is happening. To separate now is just such a bad point and unnecessary.
Well, of course, Nicola Sturgeon was saying that the war in Ukraine showed the reason why she should have an independent Scotland. I mean, she was saying that's a good example of why we had an independent Scotland.
And isn't that just a brazen attack on it, and using the war in a way to promote her own agenda? And I think that is shameless. I really do. And I just hope the good people of Scotland can see her for what she is.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, I do think it's very interesting that Michelle O'Neill has been to Butte House. I have never been able to get inside Butte House, but I look forward to maybe getting there in a different capacity in the future. So 9 months on from the Taliban's takeover of Afghanistan, women have been still banned from secondary education and some areas of paid work. And indeed, just 2 weeks ago, the Afghan Ministry for the Propagation of Virtue and the Prevention of Vice announced a nationwide order for women to wear the burqa in public, despite previous Taliban assurances that such practices would not be imposed. Then, throughout the Russian war in Ukraine, there have been reports of mass sexual violence imposed against Ukrainian women as a weapon of war. And with women subjected to maltreatment and used as pawns in warfare, what can we do to protect women and girls in such conflict-ridden parts of the world? Well, I'm delighted to say that now we're joined by Nargis Nihan. She's a former Afghan politician and Minister for Mines, Petroleum and Industries. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. I suppose, first of all, I'd like you to give an update to our viewers and listeners as to what is the plight of women in Afghanistan today.
Well, as you know, the situation, unfortunately, is getting worse day by day. Although it was promised by the Taliban during the negotiation that this time they are going to govern Afghanistan very differently, and they are going to have very moderate Islamic version of Sharia in their policies when it comes to human rights, women's rights, and minorities' rights in Afghanistan. But since they have taken control of Afghanistan in 15 August, we see that first of all they didn't allow girls to go to school. Still, girls are sitting at home. Most of the women working in public sectors are not allowed to go to their works, and most of them are being removed from their positions. Women in the civil society are facing a lot of restrictions. More than 3,500 small and medium-scale enterprises which were being founded and run by women, most of them are going bankruptcy because they just cannot run their businesses. And the last decree that they just issued 2 weeks back is totally shocking because once again they require women that they have to wear either burqa or they have to wear they have to fully cover their face except their eyes with black hijab. While there are statements back from the Taliban side saying that we just advise that, but we don't require. It's not compulsory for women to wear that. But we have also seen videos of women that they have gone to public universities, and those of them that they had color scarves and they had not covered their faces, they were not allowed to enter university.
Goodness. And as well as that, the Taliban have said that they are going to allow girls back into secondary education, but they haven't done that. And do you see any sign of that happening anytime soon?
You know what Taliban are good at is continuous promising.
Yeah.
That's what they have been doing throughout the negotiation promise, and that's what they have been doing in the last 9 months. They keep on promising, but we see literally nothing in action. So what is more important for all of us that we keep Taliban to account by the action what they are doing, not by promises that they're making, because they have lost that credibility that they would promise something, and we believe them and we trust them that they are going to deliver on them.
I suppose one of the worrying things about this, if you like, order to wear a veil in public is that if women don't do that, it may lead to domestic violence and even at the most extreme to honour killings. I mean, that would just be an awful thing. But I mean, is that a possibility?
I mean, there are 2 things which are very important that in decree that will happen and with the changes that they are making. First of all, in this decree, they have given the responsibility of observing hijab for women to their male companions or male family members. So that means that if a woman is not observing hijab, or if she's not wearing burqa, they are going to hold the male family member of her accountable for that. So in that case, what is happening that they're literally making men in charge of women in the house, right? And then imagine if a brother of 12 years old can tell the sister of 30 years old or the mother of 50 years old that you have to observe a job because I will be held accountable if you don't observe it properly. So that is definitely going to increase because that gives a lot of power once again to women in terms of controlling women's wearing, movement, life inside the houses. That's one side of it. On the other side of it, when the decree is being issued, in terms of its implementation, the knowledge is very limited among the Taliban members. So everybody's interpreting the law based on the knowledge and based on their own version of Islam that they have. So every soldier is going to implement it very differently. And we know very well that Taliban really are not good when it comes to rule of law, when it comes to governing the situation. So not only women will be increasing violence and the violence will be increasing inside the houses, women will also face a lot of violences when they go outside because anybody can interpret the law in any way that they want and they can hold these women to account and ask them that why you have not observed these hijab. So this is something which is really worrying. And on top of that, the other problem that we have, they have abolished Ministry of Women's Affairs, the Department of Women's Affairs that we had in all the provinces. They have just recently also closed the Human Rights Commission in Kabul, and as well as their offices in the provinces. So right now we don't have any public institution structure in the provinces that if women are facing violence in their families or in their communities, they can just go to. They really don't know where they have to go if they are facing any kind of violence or if they are facing any kind of problem.
Well, Nagras, I will keep raising this issue so that people are aware of what's happening in Afghanistan. It's so important that we hear your voice. And thank you so much for coming on this afternoon and letting us know what's happening there. Claire, just let me bring you in finally. I mean, that is quite a wake-up call when you hear that sort of thing going on in Afghanistan.
It's horrendous. It's like women are being deleted from the history.
Yeah.
They are not allowed to think for themselves. There is no ministry for women. There are no laws to protect them anymore. And they are being given to men. And I
but
find
it's a hand over to men, I think.
Absolutely. And that is just heartbreaking to hear. And as you've said before, they've had a glimpse of what the future could be like, and it's now just been taken away from them.
It is. It's so awful. And I do want to say to viewers and listeners, we're definitely going to keep looking at this on this show. It's very important for me that we keep a watching brief on what's happening in Afghanistan and indeed in Ukraine with the sexual violence that's occurring there at present as well. But thank you for watching today. You've been watching The Briefing with me, Arlene Foster. Claire Pearsall, thank you so much for joining and being with me today. The show's back every Friday from 3 p.m. And up next, it's Nana Akua. See you then.
Alex Deakin with your latest weather updates. It's looking drier and brighter for most tomorrow, but before we get there, the rest of today promises further heavy showers. Feels pretty cool as well if you're heading out tonight. Low pressure is in control of our weather, sitting way up to the north, but spiralling around it bands of showers. One in particular across parts of Scotland, crossing northern England this evening, providing some fairly heavy downpours, a lot of spray and surface water on the roads. That